Hi there. So we get to our closing plenary session. My name is Andrew Ward. I'm the pharmaceuticals correspondent for the Financial Times. It's a pleasure to be here. The title of our session is Research and Innovation, a benefit for all citizens and a driver of growth. So I think our objective over the next hour or so is to work out how we can make that title a reality. There's no shortage of effort being put into research and innovation in the sector at the moment, but it's less clear whether this is always optimized for the benefit of citizens and to drive economic growth. We all understand the rising burden of non-communicable diseases, cancer, diabetes, dementia, that result from an aging global population. The Ebola Crisis, meanwhile, the rise of antimicrobial resistance shows us we mustn't lose sight of the risks posed by infectious diseases as well. So how can we allocate resources between these very diverse challenges? How can we attract more investment? How can we increase productivity? Is it possible to produce medical breakthroughs that are affordable to society while also producing a return to investors? Some of the solutions will come from personalized medicine, genomics, digital health, big data, but can these concepts live up to the very considerable hype that surrounds them? Sharper science, more collaborative R&D, more streamlined regulation, smarter policy, all of these things will have a big role to play if we are to achieve the goals set out in the title of this session, driving innovation for the benefit of society as well as for investors. So we have an excellent panel to wrestle with these issues. Starting first with Draghia-Akli, Director of Health Research and Innovation at the European Commission. So Ruxandra, if I can invite you to the stage, and I'm hoping that you can give us the Brussels view of the Health Innovation Challenge. Nice to meet you. And would you like to take a microphone and address, well, wherever you wish, from here, from there?
That this is not a TED presentation. It works, okay. So I'm very happy to be here this afternoon and discuss with you from our perspective what we can do more for research and innovation, and if we would be able to make the most out of research and innovation in Europe. And at the risk of being considered wishy-washy at the beginning, I would say that we are doing this sometimes, and in fact it depends. And I would like to, from my answer, to try to convince you that at the European level, we are undertaking some activities and types of processes that basically involves everyone and which are in fact pushing forward the uptake of research and innovation into the healthcare and to the patients. So let me explain, and we'll start a bit with the big picture. As around the globe, Europe is facing the challenge of the aging population, and while life expectancy at birth have increased significantly in the last 20 years, about 5 years, unfortunately, the disability-free life expectancy didn't follow. And while we are able to prevent and treat chronic diseases in a much better way than we were, for instance, capable of doing so 50 years ago, for instance, the success rate after a heart attack of an intervention is increased by 40%, and in many types of cancers, the survival increased dramatically. There are very significant differences throughout Europe. So, for instance, the survival rate in Sweden after a cancer is 20% higher than in Poland. So, on the top of it, some very innovative solutions and interventions that can be cost-effective if we are looking at the patient. are hampered in their introduction to those patients by the upfront costs, which are limiting their availability throughout Europe. So for instance, Sovaldi for hepatitis C or Bexsero for meningitis B are very good examples of such interventions. And despite a lot of new omics coming and the inception of the individualized medicine, very many common diseases are still treated with types of interventions or drugs that are not in fact treating the patient to which they are administered. So this is not the whole picture, because also on the other side you have the public expenditure for health, which of course, it is meant to increase both for chronic conditions and chronic care, about 2% of GDP each in the next 30 years. But the challenge is that if we are looking at the healthcare costs between 2009 and 2012, in fact, it decreased in most European countries, while it increased about 5% in the previous decade. So, and if you are looking at what is coming through the pipeline, which is research and innovation, I would say that the European programs, Horizon 2020, are a glimpse of hope in what is happening in the type of crisis in Europe, which is a decrease in the budgets for research and innovation. A little also hope from the private side, because in the last year, in 2014, we have seen an increase in investment in biotech of about 2.4 billion euros compared to the previous year. So how can we learn from the European level? And I would say that much have been said about collaboration, about working together, and about the support that these models of cooperation have been putting forward. So, for instance, Europe is fostering the biggest public-private partnership in the world through the Innovative Medicine Initiative, investing with the pharmaceutical industry and other industries some 3.3 billion euros until 2020, capitalizing on another 2 billion investment that had occurred in the first iteration of IMI. Looking at, for instance, neglected and poverty-related diseases, we have developed a cooperation with the member states in the context of the European and Developing Countries Clinical Trial Partnership, again, leveraging the investment of the member states. And then we do have, and I'm very happy to see Alain Baudet here in the room, a lot of international consortia where, together with the other funding agencies, we are working to tackle very complex problems where no national funding body can do it alone. For instance, rare diseases, cancer, genome, or traumatic brain injury. So what I'm trying to say is that all this type of collaborative activity are demonstrating that we can do it if we work together. And taking the example of the personalized medicine, the right therapy at the right time for the right patient, I would say that the European example, together with the global partners, is to work with the right partner at the right time to deliver the right results. And I would say that that example will have to be capitalized on and avoid two issues. First, that those interventions are not arriving to the patient. They are uptaken in the healthcare and the health system. And then, of course, that would involve the fact that we at the European level would need to ensure that we have the right rewards, the right incentives, the right regulation, obviously foster the dialogue, including in health technology assessment. The previous speaker was mentioning it, and in fact create the entire ecosystem that would allow that the research and innovation results are in fact arriving to the patient. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Some fascinating comments there. Just a couple of follow-ups, and we have to make up some lost time, so we're going to have to rattle through all our sessions today, but I'm going to risk just a couple of quick ones. You've worked in academia, medicine, industry, now in government. I think you've spent a bit of time in the US. It gives you a great vantage point from which to assess European competitiveness in this industry versus the vibrancy that we all see in the US life science sector. How is Europe doing? Can it compete with the US?
I do believe that through these cooperation programs, and in particular through the Innovative Medicine Initiative, we are now moving towards the fact that Europe can be seen as an example of cooperation. And indeed, to be a leader, a global leader, means that you can sit together at the table with all the stakeholders, ask the questions, and then try to find common solutions. And I'm very happy that Michelle Goldman, who has been the Executive Director of Innovative Medicine Initiative, is here today. Probably will share some of the thoughts of how difficult it was at the beginning to establish this dialogue and to establish the platform, probably because the confidence among the various stakeholders was not there, and the difference that it makes. So I'm very optimistic seeing the results that are coming now from the IMI projects, including changing guidance, changing regulatory approaches, with the fact that regulatory agencies are working together within the IMI projects, that there is a lot of hope that indeed Europe will become the global leader in this arena.
Just a very quick one on data privacy, because I know this exercises a lot of debate in Brussels and within the industry. We know the concerns that exist among the public, among politicians about the privacy of healthcare data. We also know the importance of that data to making research more efficient. Can a compromise be found?
I'm an optimist, so I'm sure that a compromise will be found. Of course, that the proposal of the Commission for the new data protection regulation is now in the discussion with the colleagues from the European Parliament and from the Council. There are very different point of views. But why I'm optimistic is also because we are part of various international consortia. And I think that taking that example, we can move forward. While the data is in fact shared within the members of the consortia, so taking into account all the ethical considerations, all the confidentiality, if you wish, the data is shared in a very logical manner among the researchers and had helped very much to progress those areas. So because Alan is here, I'm going to give an example from our International Rare Disease Consortium, where this data sharing policy has been discussed and put in place from the very beginning. The goals of the initiatives are to deliver by 2020 a diagnostic means for most rare diseases, which there are about 6,000 to 8,000 of them, and new therapies for 200 diseases. We are now, the initiative was launched in 2011, and because of this data sharing, we are now at more than 3,000 diseases where a diagnostic means have been put in place, and we are at 147 therapies. So I'm very optimistic that by 2020 we will get to 240 therapies, more than what we have foreseen initially. So I think that the right use of data can create significant value, and the right way forward will be found.
Well, let's hope so. I'd love to talk more, but I'm afraid we're going to have to move on. But thank you very much for your comments, and feel free to leave the stage. Thank you. So our next speaker is not only a top European academic, he's also a renowned scientist in his own right, a specialist in neuroscience, an authority also on global health policy and governance. Please welcome Ole Petter Ottesen, Rector of the University of Oslo, to the stage. Thanks. Go ahead with your remarks. Thanks.
So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm not here in my capacity today as a neuroscientist, neither as a rector, but as somebody who's deeply engaged in global health issues, as you pointed out. So I was convinced by the chair to focus entirely on some issues related to global health. And what I will focus on, in fact, is one single word in the title of this session: all, a benefit for all citizens and a driver for growth. I think one of the major challenges ahead is simply to ensure accessibility and to reduce the tremendous health inequities that we have in our world today. So the take-home message is quite clear, and the question is extremely simple. Just a fraction of the world's population benefits from the sophisticated technological advances in medicine that we have heard so much about during this particular conference. And many do not take part in innovations at all within the field of medicine. There are tremendous health inequities still, and in many parts of the world, these health inequities are on the rise. So we have to organize and govern ourselves in a different manner, and I should say, this is also what I consider innovation, but at a very different level. So BIOVISION has this goal to ensure global health through customized approaches. And I would say that global governance, should be customized for health. Because inequities are harmful, we all know this, and that's true also for those at the top. And Ebola Crisis is a point that we should really make lessons from. Many people now, they are very aware of the fact that Ebola has obviously much to do with infection by medicine in a classical sense, but it's also a matter of global governance at fault. And Paul Farmer said it very eloquently: the terrorism of poverty, that's Ebola. So what we have done, and I was the head of this particular endeavor, was to form a commission, an international commission, to look into the global governance aspects of health, to try to understand how decisions that are taken outside of the health sector, in all other political sectors, impact health, very often in a negative manner. We're talking about the political determinants of health. This commission consisted of 18 different people from different parts of the world, 15 countries being represented. And we looked into 7 policy arenas outside of the health sector, and these are shown here, to try to understand and analyze what are the health impacts of the policies in these different political arenas. One example of how important this exercise is shown by this, I would admit, rather extreme example. There are tremendous and very valuable initiatives taken in this world today. Vaccine initiatives, other technical interventions aimed at specific diseases, and they are wonderful and they provide results. But they are extremely fragile. They're dependent on a political landscape which are conducive to those technical interventions. We saw this very clearly when the Syria crisis came up. Just about a year ago, we had this lesson from the WHO, a global health emergency in Syria. Polio was almost eradicated. But then, because of this conflict, many of these efforts were in vain. Polio is again on the rise. So this shows that we have to pay attention, although this is an extreme example, we have to pay attention to the political landscape outside of the health sector. Another very important issue, I was just visiting Latin America. As was said just a few minutes ago, non-communicable diseases, including diabetes, too, is on the rise, despite the fact that we know much more about these diseases when it comes to their mechanisms than ever before. In Latin America, this is also a growing problem among children. So it's irrelevant just to point to the personal choices involved when it comes to lifestyle and so forth. We have to look into the political mechanisms that are at play when it comes to this rise in diabetes 2 among children. Marketing of unhealthy food is one typical example. So within the field of food security, there are multiple examples that we analyze in our report and that should be taken into account in an innovative fashion when it comes to the idea of promoting global health in the future. One example, financial speculation in food commodities. This is something that is done by people who are not held accountable for the effects. And we know that financial speculation in food commodities was one reason, one of several reasons for the food crisis that we had in 2007, 2008, because of the price volatility. There are other examples when austerity packages, bailout packages are formed. There is very little attention paid to the possible health effects. Again, we are looking at decisions made in political arenas outside of the health sector that severely affect health. So the Commission comes up with a number of proposals, a number of innovations, I would say. And there is no time to discuss these here today, but two of these proposals are shown here. There is an urgent need for a policy forum that can bring together stakeholders also outside of the health sector, bring them together with industry and also with WHO, obviously. And now we have established an independent monitoring panel that goes much more deeply into some of the cases that I showed you just a few minutes ago, to better understand and to instill awareness of the extreme dependency of health on political arenas outside of the health sector. So, to ensure that research and innovation that benefit all citizens, the title of this particular session, we have to have innovative thinking on how health can be taken into account when decisions are made in all policy arenas. We have to customize global governance for health because, as you all know, disease is not just biology gone awry, and health is not just a technical outcome. There are very important political determinants of health, and the analysis underneath these assertions are found in the report that I just alluded to. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. There's so much we could talk about there, but I'll be in big trouble if I let the schedule slip any further. But I would like to just try and pull together your interest in health economics with your scientific background in neuroscience. Tell me whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about the progress towards a treatment for dementia.
Well, obviously, I'm an optimist. That's quite clear. And I think the key word here is awareness. Because what we stumbled upon during our work in this commission is that there is not sufficient awareness of the toll that these decisions take on the human population, socially as well as economically, when it comes to health. So awareness is a key, and I think we need even more scientific evidence to support the idea that we have to bring innovation to the fore, also when it comes to the policy arenas. And of course, it's very strange that I, as a molecular biologist that was working on diseases on the molecular level, now ended up at the other extreme, so to speak. But it has all to do with the imperative to act. As a physician, of course, we should act when we see that health is being endangered, and the scale by which health is endangered in this realm of the global governance system is enormous. So I think there is a room and a future for thinking along those lines.
Thank you very much indeed, Ole, and please feel free to join the audience. So, our next two guests will be familiar to many of you. Philippe Archinard is the Chief Executive of the biotech company Transgene, developing immunotherapies for cancer and other diseases. But he's also president of Lyon Biopol, the organization bringing together the life science industry in Lyon and the surrounding region. Michel Goldman, a renowned clinical scientist and until recently executive director of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, the public-private partnership which brings together Europe's life science industry with the European Union to foster R&D. Very good to be joined by both of you, Philippe and Michel. Michel, you've had the perfect vantage point with your role at the IMI to see industry, public sector, academia working together. Having left that role quite recently, did you leave optimistic about progress towards adopting new models or pessimistic?
I'm optimistic, and I will let you know why. I think that what has been demonstrated is that indeed by joining forces you can do things moving forward and indeed reaching the patients. But for that first you need money, but money is not enough. And as the CEO of the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson said, money alone won't bring cures. You need to think about new ways to use the money that you need, and this is what we try to do at IMI. Of course, as Ruxandra said, we had a large budget, but what we try to do with the Commission, with the European Federation of Fiber Industry, is really to make medical research evolving. And there are key aspects that were not and that are still not sufficiently considered that we have to move forward to remain optimistic. First is to make sure that data are standardized. We need standards to move clinical research forward, and to establish standards is not something very attractive for academics, but I think that through IMI, with the help of other organizations such as CDISC, we demonstrate that the development of standards can be extremely rewarding. To learn from success, to learn from failure. For example, our consortium in IMI on schizophrenia demonstrated that by gathering data from 8 different companies on, I think, more than 10,000 patients enrolled in different trials, you can demonstrate that you can reduce the duration of the clinical trial and the number of patients to be enrolled. But we have also to learn from failure. I think you asked the question about dementia. And you know of all these phase 3 trials which failed. And there, when you try to combine data, it's not so obvious. So you have to develop standards, and you have to develop standards that will be approved by the regulator. And again, I think it was, and it's still one of the strengths of IMI, is to engage regulators, and one of our success was indeed to lead EMA to develop new guidelines in the case of Alzheimer autism. Now, I think this has been alluded to. There is also a new type of research which aims at changing the design of clinical trials. You know, these placebo-controlled randomized crossover trials, I mean, they are not efficient. We have to use new tools, new statistical approaches, and there the key word is adaptive. You need adaptive clinical trial design, which are important to accelerate the process, but they are also important for the patients immediately, because it will increase the chance for a patient enrolled in a trial to get an efficient product. Also, we heard about, the research which is needed to really develop this new pathway to indeed make sure that the new medicines reach the patients. And there also we need the regulators, and especially in Europe, together with the Commission, together with IMI, these new adaptive licensing pathways are explored very intensively. And finally, I would really insist on new methods to assist risks, benefits of drugs and vaccines. And the example of vaccine is very interesting. Again, through IMI, it was possible to bring around the table not only industry and academia, but also the ECDC and the European Medicine Agency to reflect together, to develop like a blueprint to indeed assess the risk benefit of vaccine. So I think that if we succeed to move forward with these new approaches, we can be optimistic.
Philip, feel free to respond to anything that Michelle's raised. If I can also just throw in a question with both your transgene hat and also as the head of a cluster trying to foster collaboration. This industry, open innovation, it sounds like a nice concept, but this industry has traditionally been based on the value of your own intellectual property. It's been quite secretive. Is the industry ready for the psychological shift required of more collaborative, open R&D?
I think it is, things have changed dramatically, and I see as example a project that we've been driving recently in Lyon, and it's setting up from scratch with different stakeholders of a new technological research institute. Because I think that everything that Michel said is obviously correct, but it failed to change the paradigm, and in fact we still stay in a mode where one usually large industry player is asking a question, and it's a make or buy type of thing. He's either doing it alone or doing it with somebody else, but it doesn't truly change the paradigm. I think we have to come up, because that was enough in order to answer simple questions. But now the unmet medical need we are all facing are such that even the largest company cannot even dream to be able to cope with that alone. And this is why I'm optimistic in a way, because the challenges are such that it forces even the largest company to change. And I think this is what we see. And Sanofi is one of the founders in this Technological Research Institute. And I'm not sure that they would have been behind the project as they are today, maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So I think that if only we have to work together in asking, it's in the way we have to bring all stakeholders, and we've touched upon the fact that payers and patients should be more and more part of the specs in a way. I mean, we cannot think of innovating product absent of input from these guys very early on. Academia, large companies, but also smaller companies. And these all stakeholders should be involved early enough to frame the questions. And then we find ways to provide for solutions. But we need to change this. And this is what we are aiming to do in our Technological Research Institute. And the last element I would add on this is that we have to move from this virtual project where we are partners, but everybody stays on his own premises and far away from each other, to a concept where people work together under one roof as much as we can. And this is also one of the elements of this new Technological Research Institute that we are trying to bring. And I'm convinced that if you have around the technological platform scientists coming from many origins, working together, willing to share something and not to control everything, understanding that if they own a part of something which is 10 times bigger, they are better off than owning 100% of something 10 times smaller. I think we will make progress.
Michel, you wanted to come in?
No, I think I agree with Philippe. We are not there yet in terms of optimizing collaboration. And I think that one of the reasons is that whereas the industry is quite well organized, what means value for industry is clear, the objectives are clear, I think for the other stakeholders, we have still to organize ourselves, the governments, the universities, the small, medium-sized enterprise, the regulatory agency, the patients' organization. And, you know, we have to enter into a fruitful dialogue with industry, and this needs, I think, additional reflection and organization. And for me, it's all about agreeing of what means value for each stakeholders, and to organize the collaboration according to what we define as value, which means that we have to develop also new metrics to evaluate, you know, also the performance of all these things. And there, I think that patient outcomes will become more and more important. And that's one of the key reasons why we have indeed to engage much more patients in the process, because one key value element is indeed the patient outcome.
I'm interested in your view as to where the greatest blockage is exist? Because when I talk to pharma executives, they say, we're ready to embrace value-based pricing, adaptive licensing. They say it's often the health systems and the regulators who are not keeping up. Is that valid?
Question for me?
Yeah, but I'd be interested in
I think the reality is more complex. First, I don't think that all companies agree necessarily together. Second, inside the same company, the view might be different. What the CEO will tell you might be quite different from what the lawyers in the same company will tell you. So I don't think that it's so obvious. I think that what's obvious is that everyone agrees that significant changes are needed in terms of clinical trial licensing. How this will operate, I don't know. I hope that the efforts made by the European Medicine Agency in Europe, with the strong support of, again, the Commission and IMI, which is investing a lot there, will indeed allow to implement, pilot trials and things like that. But I think it's a bit easy to say, okay, industry is ready and the others. We have still to organize, again, these things according. Also, it's not easy because the regulators must be careful for obvious reasons.
But I don't think we need to, at this stage, agree on the final game because we don't know what it's going to be. I think what's important today, and I think we are there because, again, the productivity of the R&D of pharma is overall declining. The cost of any development is increasing. The challenge to solve are increasing. So there is at least a willingness to try something else, to try something new, to try something different. And we have to be confident and optimistic that there may be different ways to tackle this problem, depending on where we stand and so on. But at least if we don't try, we are sure to stay the same. So this willingness to try, I think, is there within the large pharma player, the large actors in the industry. And that's maybe what we should be focusing on, and we'll see where it ends.
Okay, let's talk quickly about financing. We've seen some improvement in Europe. There's, as Ruxandra said, there has been an increase in financing over the past 18 months or so. But when Selectis looked to raise serious money recently, it went to NASDAQ. How can Europe close the financing gap?
If I knew. No, I mean, first we have to be more specific because I think it's quite heterogeneous. If we look at public subsidies in a way, I think if we put together what the local governments, the state and Europe puts together, we may end up matching what the US government is doing. If we look at the number of startups in Europe versus US, I think we have more startups in Europe than in US. If you look at seed money, maturation, early stage, we have, I think, I know maybe more the situation in France, but I think it's true also beyond. We have adequate financing. So I think where we really truly have an issue is the stock market. I mean, and this has a lot to do with basically the way our retirement are paid, the fact that we don't have pension fund, that we have a fiscal system which is less prone to enthuse risk-taking in the investor. So there is a big gap. And the fact that, I mean, you mentioned Selectis, you could have mentioned a lot of names, is simply that there is a lot more deeper pocket over there. And also, and I think that, as you say, money is one thing, so the quantity is important, but it's also a system. And what we don't have here in Europe is a large enough group of people that goes from analysts, from fund management to I mean, it's a whole system, and the capacity to invest that makes the difference in the US. We have too few analysts, for instance, in Europe, and that's in itself is a big problem.
One quick word on financing, then I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. So, Michel.
Yeah, just 2 points. First, I think that Europe under Horizon 2020, took very important initiatives to support the small, medium-sized enterprise and to facilitate their financing. And I think it's important for all of us to consider this. This is one point. The other point is that I really think that we need completely new scheme for certain types of funding. And I have been very impressed by the proposal made by Andy Lowe, economist at MIT, proposing to create mega funds to address key questions related to cancer, related to rare diseases, and more recently to dementia. And I think that we really need this type of reflection from top-notch economists to really change the system.
Thank you very much, both of you. I'd love to talk longer, but we'll have to leave it there. Perhaps we can continue over cocktails. Thank you, Michelle. So our next speaker will give us a different perspective. A different perspective on all the challenges we've been discussing, and it's an important one. It's that of a health insurer. Please welcome to the stage Christian Schmidt de la Brele, CEO of Clicia. And just for English speakers like me, Christian will be speaking in French, so please have your headsets ready.
Thank you, Andrew. I do apologize because I've got a real horrible English accent, so I will speak in French. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's speak French a little bit in this wonderful assembly here. So this might wake a few people up before the important ceremony organised by the creators of BIOVISION. So this is an absolutely wonderful event. And above all, I'd like to thank you, creators and founders, particularly Alain Mérieux and Didier Hoche, for having organised us and invited an insurance company here for this concluding session and to talk about the health system. This is a good opportunity to exchange with the producers of care, so the pharma companies, and also us, because we are part of the French system, and our French system is based on solidarity, and 70% of the health expenditure is funded by the general regime in France, but 30%, and maybe increasingly so, is incurred by the complementary insurance companies. So in this respect, out of this 30%, you should bear in mind that the large majority of complementary insurance companies are non-profit organizations. There are two main families, in fact. So we have the mutual funds, and also we have the providence institutions, such as our group, Clicia. So our job consists in protecting certain sectors of activity, and it's a great pleasure for us to protect, not only when it comes to management of complementary retirement and health insurance. So we protect health professionals as well, particularly health transport systems, health transport companies, also medical analysis laboratories, and the chemists and pharmacies that we protect in our regime. So on this particular subject, if we're talking about growth and innovation, it's quite easy to understand that health expenditure accounts for about 12 to 13% of the GDP in France, and much more so, in fact, in the United States. But at the end of the day, health, which is maybe the third export market in France after Airbus and the automotive industry. The health industry has three factors which explain why this market is growing, in fact. First of all, people are living older and older, and therefore they're getting sicker and sicker. The second factor is the fact, well, it's quite a simple fact, in fact, the fact that the cost of access to health care might be higher than it was in the past today, thanks to the improvement in technologies, so that we can screen and detect pathologies. In the past, we used to use ECG machines, and now we use scanners and MRI systems, and obviously this costs a little bit more. And the third factor is the fact that we all have, and next year we'll all have even more than this year, we'll all be concerned about the the protection of our property and the protection of our people, and this is the third cubic factor, if you like. So this is the third factor which explains the growth of this health market. So we know that today, after the de-reimbursement and the general regime, we know that for financial backers such as us on this health market, if we have seen zero growth, or let's say today or last year, the health insurance market is naturally growing by 5% a year. So this is an opportunity for us. It might seem a bit cynical, but nonetheless, it is quite a promising sector, in fact, and quite a buoyant sector. There are certain limitations to this, and here I'm very happy about the fact that we're insurance, but also that we have some health producers here at this forum with us, because we do have to work together, really. And although our expenditure is increasing, at one point in time, the health budget will not be able to make way for other budgets, and therefore we have to make sure that we find innovation in our markets and find subjects that we, as the financial backers, are very interested in. One source of innovation, which is maybe for the longer term, is more control over data, health data. And when I talk about control over health data, this means we have to control innovative processes, and this should enable us to have more efficient work and therefore provide more coverage for the risks that we're supposed to protect in the health insurance sector. And secondly, I think we could focus on the fact that in some cases we should eradicate some of these pathologies. And here we see the link that we have as complementary insurance companies and the need for us to invest or help invest in research so as to eradicate diseases and pathologies. And this might seem quite altruistic as a name for us, but at Clesia, we're one of the leading funders of public-private partnerships in the Bone Marrow Institute in Paris, for example. So our philosophy is that as complementary health insurers, if we are able to remedy the cost of complementary insurance, obviously we have to try and eradicate the disease, and this will limit our costs. And also we could think about innovation through prevention, and we are working on rather basic prevention systems, so it's not necessarily very sexy or very bling-bling, as we say in France, but we are working with a big operator on vaccines in Lyon, which you probably know whom I'm referring to here. And we are working on the next winter campaign, and we want to disseminate an awareness-raising campaign for all of the people that we serve in Clesia. So we work for hundreds of companies. So obviously our logic or our philosophy is rather simple, because if we work on prevention, and if we are able to vaccinate a maximum number of people, obviously this means that our employees will become more productive and they'll feel better in the company. And also the company won't have any people who go off work because they're sick. And this protects, in turn, the SMEs. For example, in a company canteen, on average, well, in some cases you only have 4 people who work there, and if one person is missing from the canteen, then you have 25% people less working in the canteen, and this poses problems. So we have to work on prevention through all of the investments that we're doing with transport companies. So the idea is to minimize the consequences of any problems in the transport system as well, because we have to protect road haulage companies who are involved in the medical system, and we're thinking about installing defibrillators in all of these vehicles, road haulage company vehicles, and it should be natural on the part of our citizens. For example, if somebody sees somebody suffering from a heart attack and they see a truck driving past, they should, well, I know that in this truck there's going to be defibrillator, or in a bus there's going to be defibrillator. So these are types of innovative projects that we're working on. And we work as insurers with the pharmaceutical companies. So we're working on different forms of innovation so as to make sure that we really do promote prevention, because prevention is extremely important. And the idea is not necessarily for us to live older and older, but to live older and older, but less and less sick when we get old. Our market objectives shouldn't prevent us from achieving this aim as well. So this is why we're working with different companies. We're working with the pharmaceutical companies, particularly on issues such as the interaction of drugs for our pensioners. We pay a lot of pensions to our companies who are members of our insurance system. And you know that there are 128,000 people admitted to hospital per year among our pensioners. So obviously we have to find a solution for this, and it might seem quite commonplace or quite obvious to you, but if we can avoid any problems with the medical interaction or the interaction between the patient and medical drugs, then this can prevent us spending a lot of money. So we have a very noble mission, which is to fund complementary health insurance, but at the same time, this doesn't prevent us from working with pharmaceutical companies so as to help grow our health industry as well. And in the French dictionary, we used to have next to the word insurance, we used to have the word thief next to the word insurer. But everyone thinks insurance companies are thieves, but we don't want to be considered thieves anymore, because in fact we are there to protect the population as well, and we work hand in hand with the pharmaceutical industry so as to make sure that we protect our increasingly old population, but a population which is less and less sick.
So, now, we are, according to our schedule, out of time. We have one more panel left. Can we take 10 minutes? So let's, with no further ado, let's quickly welcome our two remaining panelists. So Philippe Luscan, Executive Vice President of Global Industrial Affairs and President of French Operations for Sanofi. And Joshua Geim, Chief Technology Officer for the Consumer Businesses of Johnson & Johnson. Please come and take a seat. So we've got to try and compress everything we want to talk about in 10 minutes. So let me first throw it open to each of you. You've heard what everyone said. Here we have two of the world's biggest healthcare groups, Sanofi, Johnson & Johnson. How do you each fit into this new world that we've been talking about? Tell us, Philippe.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think I will come back to all your message about innovation and collaboration. And to start by that, I would like to give you some very good news from a Sanofi perspective, because you know that we are launching new products. This year, 6 new molecules all over the world, and the following years, 2 per year, so up to 20 new molecules in the next years. And so the innovation of Sanofi in many fields, rare disease, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, cardiovascular, and I would like to finish by the vaccine, because we are in Lyon, and the dengue vaccine, I'm sure, and to capabilities and expertise. So I think innovation and collaboration are getting accelerated, and Sanofi Pasteur is a big vector of that, and we are very, very engaged in this dynamic.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Give us the J&J view, Josh.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think from what people talked about today, we're making the healthcare issue just about finding drugs at the end, whereas we need to start addressing throughout the spectrum of healthcare, which includes the health and wellness piece, the consumer products, over-the-counter drugs that are coming in, and then in the drug side, which is critical from a collaboration, from innovation perspective. This is part of the reason, I think most of you are probably familiar, we talked about it a few minutes in another meeting about the innovation centers that we're opening, so that this is not a US-based research anymore. This is happening, research and innovation is happening around the world, and we need to be upfront, whether we're doing the innovation center in Shanghai, whether we're doing it in Boston, it should be treated through collaboration to give access. A lot of the innovators, a lot of the companies, and also better collaboration with governments, regulators, it has to be across the board. The last piece is, I think, there's a lot of learnings that we absolutely have to take advantage of. And I think the best example is what happened with Ebola. I think if you look at the work that's happening across companies, across government agencies, the collaboration, the fact that we're able to accelerate getting a vaccine into clinical trial instead of waiting 7 years, it's happening in 1 year. So what are the learnings that as an industry, as government agencies, as companies, that we need to continue to learn from the experiences that we're seeing, and how do we leverage that into other areas of diseases.
Of course, J&J is the biggest, by many measures, healthcare group in the world, with everything from baby oil to cancer drugs to knee implants to painkillers. How does such a big group fit into this more sort of nimble, collaborative type of R&D that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, and I think you'll see, we still invest significant amount of money into R&D, internally, and a lot of it goes externally. A few years back, we actually made a decision. As much as we have incredible scientists in-house, we have 128,000 employees worldwide, there's a lot of opportunity internally, but we believe that innovation is not going to be done by us only, which is why I think we're opening our doors. If you look at some of the things that we're doing to help even startups accelerate their time, and if you look at large companies in the past, there was always strings attached to whatever we work when we work with smaller companies. We've moved away from that to say, it's actually no strings attached. Come use our experts. Come use our facilities when you need to, because we have built the infrastructure that a startup doesn't need to build the same capabilities. So I think the model will continue to evolve, but it can't just be also just J&J and the small startups, the innovators. We need to bring in regulators, government agencies, nonprofits. All of them have to be on the table to be able to move things at a much faster pace.
Philippe, let's just briefly hear a bit more about the dengue product, because we've heard a lot today about the problems in the industry, the things that still need to be done. Here's an example of a product that is definitely helping society. You believe it's going to produce a return for your investors. So perhaps we shouldn't be too gloomy. Tell us how you've brought this product about.
I think it's a long story, a long scientific story, which is a very big proud of the teams of Pasteur. And we are registering now this vaccine in many countries all over the world. We have built a plant close to Lyon, in Neuville-sur-Saône. We did it 7 years ago when we were still in phase 2, so we took a big risk. And I think we have taken our entrepreneurial spirit to go ahead, and we are producing doses. So before the end of the year, we should be able to start vaccination in all over the world. You know that we are estimating hundreds of millions of people, patients, who are contaminated every year. So there is a lot of hope all over the world, and including in European countries and in USA. And we are very happy to bring to the patients this big vaccine and very innovative.
Okay, terrific. Competitiveness. You've opened these innovation centers, US, Europe, now Shanghai. Gives you a great global view of where competitiveness is most vibrant. How is Europe doing, and should the US and Europe both be worrying about what's coming out of Asia?
You know, I think absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of research happening around the world. Granted, it's at different levels. So Asia is still behind in terms of the technical capability, some of the scientific capability, but it's coming along very well. I think for me, instead of US, Europe worrying about what's coming, I think there's an opportunity to actually look at it from a global perspective, how we collaborate, how we work together, regardless of where the innovation is coming from. I think it is an open world nowadays, and that's part of the reason. But one of the critical things that we need to focus on is how do we prevent the preventable diseases? Because today, a lot of it is focusing on things that they need a solution short term, but for the long term, I think it's going to be critical driving healthcare costs by preventing the preventable diseases, and that's going to be a big part of it.
Quick one on competitiveness from you, Philippe. You're in charge of French operations for Sanofi. There's always a lot of scrutiny, particularly from investors, perhaps Anglo-Saxon investors who have some prejudices about French competitiveness. Tell us about how your French operations, presumably in your view, they're an asset to the company rather than something investors should worry about.
Well, I think first, all our manufacturing is an asset for the company because there is a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise. Also, I think it was said before that we contribute with a lot of export to the company and to France, which is very beneficial. And you know that in a biotech, in a vaccine, for example, there is a lot of expertise in France. And it's very helpful that a company like Pasteur can produce, export all over the world. More than 95% of its production is export all over the world. And we are working hard to maintain this leadership and competitiveness.
Now, quick last one, and because we're really out of time, but we should just touch briefly, given there's been so much debate about pricing over the past year. We've got an insurer with us. We've seen the raging debate in the US over Sovaldi between insurers and the industry. Perhaps you can briefly both tell us your view of how industry can get a return on investment while producing drugs at an affordable price to society, and perhaps you can come in then to conclude and tell us whether industry is doing enough to become more efficient. Josh.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the healthcare cost, and this is not limited to just one drug or another drug, I think it's just the overall healthcare spectrum is it's out of control for the most part. And it is important to what I said earlier, that the collaboration on how we build this versus worrying about, is this drug cost this much? I still think that there was a discussion around health outcomes. I think whether it's insurers, governments should focus on paying based on health outcomes. I think all of that is going to be critical, but it can't be the way we're operating where one side versus the other. I think it was mentioned earlier. Up front, there's got to be better collaboration. Otherwise, getting it towards the back end, talking about the pricing is not going to solve it because there's significant cost that goes into the research. Unless we plan it better, it's not going to work.
Philippe, on the pricing debate.
I think, Sanofi is a diversified company in order to be a healthcare partner. And of course, we have all the range of the portfolio, starting with innovating drugs and going to some cheaper drugs in some countries. I think this morning there was a speech from Robert Sebag, who is in charge of all the access medicine program of Sanofi, which is showing that we want to be a partner in order to get access to the patients all over the world.
And Christian, here's your chance as the insurer. How well is the industry doing to become more efficient? What would you like to see them do more?
Alors, je pense qu'en France, vous l'avez compris.
Well, I think in France, as you've understood, the model is mainly funded by the general regime, but I think we're only at the start of all of this now, and I think we have to have determination on the part of all of the parties, whether it be the insurance companies or the bigger pharmaceutical companies and industries. We have to start to work together so as to get a better solution, and so that we can grow the market together and make sure that our fellow citizens can keep the system which is based on solidarity, at least from a funding point of view, but also benefit from all of the technological breakthroughs in medicine, whether it be on the part of the industry, but we know the patients, we know the pathologies, and I think we're made to work together, really.
We better leave it there, but I think to try and draw a conclusion to this in all of the panels, it's clear that the challenges are very great, perhaps even greater than many in the public and among politicians recognise. But the good news is that there's a great deal going on already in the industry, policymakers, regulators, all trying to meet this challenge. So let's hope that these new ways of working can deliver the innovation that the life science industry and its investors need, and society certainly needs in the years to come. Thank you very much for listening. I believe we've got the best bit of the afternoon coming very shortly, the awards ceremony, so stay tuned for that. Thank you very much. All right, thanks. Thank you.